Johnny Carson asked the elderly woman a simple question. She answered. The entire studio froze. And Johnny cried on live television for the first time in his 30-year career. The Tonight Show. Studio One at NBC Burbank. March 1981. Another Tuesday night. Another monologue. Another 300 people in the studio audience expecting laughs and celebrity banter, and Ed McMahon's booming. Here's Johnny! Everything was routine. Everything was comfortable. Everything was exactly what America had come to expect at 11:30 p.m. for the past 19 years. Until Johnny Carson noticed the woman in the sixth row. He was in the middle of his opening monologue. A joke about President Reagan. The audience was laughing. Ed was chuckling at his desk. Doc Severinsen and the band were ready with the musical cues. The cameras were rolling smoothly through another flawless performance. Johnny glanced toward the audience. Something he did naturally, making eye contact, connecting with the live crowd. His eyes swept across the rows of faces, and then stopped. Sixth row, slightly to the right. An elderly woman, maybe 82, 83 years old. White hair carefully styled. A floral dress that looked like it had been saved for a special occasion. She sat very still, very upright, her hands folded in her lap, and she was crying. Not the laughter tears that sometimes came during comedy. Real tears. Silent. Streaming down her weathered cheeks. Johnny stopped mid-sentence. The joke died on his lips. His smile faded. The audience noticed the shift immediately. The laughter tapered off into confused silence. Ed leaned forward at the desk, concern flickering across his face. Doc looked up from his music stand. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. Johnny lowered his microphone slightly and squinted toward the sixth row. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice gentle, the performer's voice replaced by something softer. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman looked up, seemingly surprised to be noticed. She nodded quickly, embarrassed, reaching into her purse for a tissue. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thin and shaky but carrying through the studio's excellent acoustics. "I'm fine. Please continue." "I didn't mean to interrupt." Johnny didn't continue. Instead, he did something he'd never done in 19 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He set his microphone down on his desk, stepped out from behind it, and walked toward the audience. The cameras scrambled to follow him. The director in the control booth was frantically speaking into headsets, uncertain whether to cut to commercial. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair, ready to intervene if needed. Johnny walked down the 3 steps that separated the stage from the audience section and approached the sixth row. The people sitting near the elderly woman shifted to make room, sensing something significant was happening. Johnny crouched down in the aisle beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, maybe late 80s. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis. Her eyes were pale blue and filled with a sadness that went deeper than tonight's tears. "What's your name?" Johnny asked quietly, though the boom microphones caught every word. "Dorothy," she said, dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. "Dorothy Walsh." "Dorothy, why are you crying?" She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. The studio was so quiet you could hear the slight hum of the stage lights. "Because," Dorothy said finally, her voice breaking, "you remind me of my son." Johnny's expression shifted. "Your son?" "Yes. He loved you. He watched your show every single night," he said. She paused, composing herself. "He said you made the world feel lighter. That no matter how hard the day had been, he could count on you to make him laugh before he went to sleep." Johnny remained crouched beside her chair, his hand resting on the armrest near hers. "That's very kind. Does your son? Does he still watch?" Dorothy shook her head slowly. "No. He died. 3 weeks ago. Cancer. He was only 56. A sound rippled through the studio, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. 300 strangers suddenly connected by shared grief for someone they'd never met. Johnny closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were glistening. "I'm so sorry, Dorothy." His name was Robert. She continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. "Bobby. He fought for 2 years. In the hospital, even during chemo, he made the nurses bring in a television so he could watch your show. He said if he could just laugh for 30 minutes, he could get through another day." Johnny's jaw clenched. He was fighting for composure and losing. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. "The last night," Dorothy said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He was so weak. He could barely stay awake. But it was a Tuesday, and your show was on. I held his hand and we watched together. You did a sketch, something silly with a wig and fake mustache." He laughed. It was the last time I heard him laugh. He died 4 hours later, at 3 in the morning. The tears Johnny had been fighting broke free. One slid down his cheek. Then another. In 19 years of hosting The Tonight Show, through thousands of interviews and sketches and monologues, America had never seen Johnny Carson cry on camera. Ed McMahon, watching from the desk, had tears streaming down his face. Doc Severinsen stood motionless on the bandstand, his trumpet hanging forgotten at his side. The audience was openly weeping, not the performative emotion of a television show, but real grief for Dorothy's loss and for the beauty of what her son had found in something as simple as a late-night comedy show. Johnny reached out and took Dorothy's arthritic hand in his. "Dorothy, may I ask you a question?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Why did you come here tonight? To the show?" Dorothy looked at their joined hands, then back at Johnny's face. "Because Bobby had tickets. He bought them 6 months ago. He was so excited. He circled tonight's date on the calendar. He was going to get to see his favorite show in person, get to see you right there in front of him." Her voice cracked. "But he didn't make it. So I came instead. I thought if I sat here, in this studio, watching you do what you do, it would be like having one more night with him." The studio dissolved into tears. Even the cameramen were crying. The boom operator's shoulders were shaking. In the control booth, the director had given up trying to maintain normal production protocol. This was beyond television now. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny stood up slowly, still holding Dorothy's hand. He looked at the cameras, then at his desk, then made a decision. "Ed," he called out, his voice thick with emotion. "Come here." Ed McMahon walked down from the stage, his face wet with tears, and stood beside Johnny and Dorothy. Johnny turned to the audience. "I'm going to do something we've never done before. Tonight's show, the monologue, the guests, all of it, we're canceling it." Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. The director's voice came through the studio speakers. "Johnny, we can't just—" "We are," Johnny interrupted firmly. "Tonight, this show is for Bobby. For Dorothy's son. And for anyone watching who has lost someone they loved." He looked at Doc Severinsen. "Doc, do you know what a wonderful world?" Doc nodded, understanding immediately what Johnny was asking. "Play it," Johnny said. "Play it slow. And everyone in this studio, I want you to think about someone you've lost. Someone who mattered. Someone who deserves to be remembered." Doc raised his trumpet. The band began to play Louis Armstrong's classic, slow and achingly beautiful. The brass notes filled the studio, golden, warm, and heartbreaking. Johnny led Dorothy up onto the stage. Ed pulled over one of the guest chairs and helped her sit down. Johnny sat beside her, still holding her hand, and for 5 full minutes, 5 minutes of primetime television, they sat in silence while the band played and 300 people cried and remembered. The cameras stayed on them. No commercial breaks. No jokes. No interviews. Just Johnny Carson and an elderly woman who'd lost her son, sharing grief on national television. When the song ended, the studio erupted in applause. Not the excited applause of entertainment, but the reverent applause of people acknowledging something sacred had just occurred. Johnny stood and addressed camera one directly. Tonight was supposed to be funny. It was supposed to be light. But sometimes life reminds us that behind every person watching, there's a real story. Real pain. Real loss. Dorothy came here tonight carrying the weight of losing her son, and she reminded me why I do this job. Not to be famous. Not to be clever. But to make someone's day a little bit lighter. To give someone like Bobby 30 minutes where they can forget their pain and just laugh. He turned to Dorothy. Your son's tickets, the ones he bought 6 months ago. Do you still have them? Dorothy nodded, pulling them from her purse. Worn ticket stubs, bent from being handled. Johnny took them gently. May I keep one? I'd like to frame it. Put it in my office. To remember Bobby. To remember why this matters. Yes, Dorothy whispered. He'd like that. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny walked back to his desk and opened the top drawer. He pulled out a blue cue card. The cards he used for every monologue, with jokes written in his own handwriting. He held it up. Every night I write my jokes on these cards. I've done it for 19 years. Thousands of jokes. Thousands of cards. Most of them I throw away. But tonight's card, the one I was reading when I saw Dorothy crying, I'm going to keep this one too. He showed the card to the camera. Written in Johnny's distinctive scrawl was the joke he'd been telling when he stopped. Reagan said he wants to make America laugh again. I told him, Mr. President, that's my job. This was going to be a throwaway joke, Johnny said. Forgotten by tomorrow. But now it means something different. Because Dorothy's son Bobby watched me tell jokes like this every night for years. And somehow, those silly jokes helped him fight cancer for 2 years. They gave him 30 minutes of light in a very dark time. Johnny placed the cue card and Bobby's ticket stubs side by side on his desk. These are staying right here, where I can see them every night before I go on camera. To remember that what we do here isn't just entertainment. It's medicine sometimes. It's companionship. It's a reminder that even in the darkness, there can be laughter. The audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, mixed with continued tears. Doc and the band joined in. Ed walked over and embraced Johnny. A rare moment of physical affection between the two men who'd worked together for so many years. Dorothy sat in the guest chair, overwhelmed, as the studio celebrated her son's memory and the man who'd given him so much joy. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The show never aired its scheduled content that night. Instead, NBC broadcast exactly what happened, Johnny stopping his monologue, sitting with Dorothy, the band playing, the silence and the tears. The network received over 50,000 letters in the following week. People sharing their own stories of loss. Thanking Johnny for acknowledging that grief and laughter could exist in the same space. Dorothy Walsh returned to her home in Pasadena. Johnny called her personally twice, once the day after the show, once on what would have been Bobby's 57th birthday. They talked about her son, about memories, about how love doesn't end when someone dies. The cue card and ticket stub stayed on Johnny's desk for the remaining 11 years of his Tonight Show run. When he retired in 1992, he had them professionally framed together with a small brass plate that read, "For Bobby Walsh, who reminded me why laughter matters." Dorothy Walsh passed away peacefully in 1986. In her will, she left a letter for Johnny thanking him for giving her son joy in his final years, and for giving her one last beautiful memory of Bobby in that studio. Johnny Carson never spoke publicly about that night again. But every host who came after him, Letterman, Leno, Conan, Fallon, heard the story. It became legend in late-night television. The night Johnny stopped the show. The night entertainment became something more. The framed cue card and ticket now sit in the Smithsonian, donated after Johnny's death in 2005. Beside them, a placard tells Dorothy and Bobby's story. And somewhere, in the archives of NBC, that unaired episode exists. 5 minutes of silence. A trumpet playing. A comedian holding an old woman's hand. The night Johnny Carson proved that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply be human.